Hey there! Welcome to Listen Up, the show that keeps having the guests get more interesting and my facial hair keeps getting worse. What we always talk about, if you've watched the episodes in the past, you know we focus on a lot of different things. We focus on people that care about leadership, about motivation, about innovation, all of the different ways that we can help this energy industry advance. Our guest today, Mr. Brent Wilson, is probably one of the people that I consider one of the leading members of what we would consider innovation. Innovation is one of those things that we always have to keep looking at. How can we make this industry really continue to move? How can we keep the wheels going forward? And what Brent has been able to do over these last couple years is really something that I think all of our audience is going to find very, very interesting. So you've got a lot that we're going to go over. Before we get into that, do you think the facial hair, is that pandemic related, or is it because I'm getting ready to turn 40? Like, what is happening here? Is this a good look, bad look, in between?
I think it's a good look for you because, you also have all of your hair still, and I struggle both facially and up top is receding every day. So, but
I think pandemic era, I've seen more hair in the drain than I should. But this is going away. This is coming in way grayer than it should be. But that's an hour and a half long listen up for a different day for sure.
The Zoom calls have been interesting in the sense of, if it's a low lighting kind of environment, a lot of hair, you start feeling like we're gone back a little bit in time, cavemanish a little bit.
Yes, and we used to go out and we would travel around and we'd be in different people's offices like every single week. And we know each other from our Chesapeake days, and I always liked the clean cut. I liked the three-piece suits and everything. And it really felt like midway through 2020, right in the midst of the pandemic, I think I opened up a Zoom call or a Teams meeting, and your camera catches you just right, and I was like, what have I become? I really think there was definitely a steep drop off there, but the motivation's still there. That's the main thing.
Correct. I think with Zoom, that has helped us to be cognizant of how we appear.
For sure.
But I also learned that you can just slide the cover over the camera.
That's what I need. I need the slide.
And the t-shirt have become a normal, just Friday casual, but it's a everyday casual. So it's nice to be able to get out and to dress up and to come here and be professionals today in the greatest extent.
I actually did put beard wax in today, so I want you to know I really did.
I shaved today, so
hey, look at us, we're firing on all cylinders.
Right.
Man, the reason why Brent's in today is because where we talk about innovation, and so he is the CEO and founder of Galvanic Energy, which is a very, very unique concept, and it's something that I think for the energy industry is so incredibly and has the potential of being so impactful. And just the things that we've talked about in the past, and our experiences in the past at energy industry, different jobs, the thing that has driven your career is that geology degree. And so let's start kind of back, just give people a backstory of how did you get started with this, and how does a person get into, I believe it was it hydrogeology?
Hydrogeology, yeah.
I think I picked my major midway through, at the end of maybe my sophomore to junior year. And I was like, business management, that sounds good. But I don't think that would be the same case with hydrogeology.
No, and it's my career has taken some interesting turns, and I have had the opportunity to speak to both the University of Oklahoma geology students and Oklahoma State University students about really how my career evolved. And my career did not start out in geology. I actually kind of floundered a bit early on in my life, and it's a story I like to tell young people because there's a lot of pressure to try to figure out which direction you're going to go, because once you kind of leave the gates, you got to have an idea.
You're right.
And I didn't have that real preparation coming out of high school. I went to a small school in Missouri. Didn't even understand really the value of college. Didn't have anyone immediately in my family who had gone to college and had a degree. So I didn't have mentors in that sense. I didn't have examples to follow after. Thankfully, through sports, I got an opportunity to go to school, and some teachers took the opportunity to try to show me those things. And it took a while to instill the values, and it took a while especially to figure out what I wanted to do. And so for the first 2-3 years, I took all kinds of courses and I just never knew what to focus on. They were all intriguing to me because education suddenly had this new flavor for me in life.
Right.
It wasn't just doing it to do it. It was doing it to find opportunities in my own life and what I wanted to do. And so I just spent a lot of time exploring that. And I actually started out in chemistry. I found chemistry to be of interest. It was because of a chemistry teacher and also a math teacher who kind of took me under their wing and really tried to show me the value of the education that I was receiving and trying to really kind of invigorate my own personal interests. And so I almost was a chemist. I actually had moved here to Oklahoma with my wife when she took a job here. She's a native of here. I've lived in a number of places in my past, and when I got to OU is where I was trying to finish up my chemistry degree. I was actually working downtown for a hematology lab, doing blood testing, urinalyses, not necessarily one of the favorite things chemists like to do, but part of our rigors.
Right.
But I just didn't feel like it was challenging me. I actually felt like it was almost like in an assembly line type position, that I just was pumping out tests every day, same test over and over, same machine. And so what I went back to professors and talked to them about, and of course this is a hard conversation with your wife, after spending years and now you're in your mid-20s, moving towards late 20s, and you still haven't figured it out, and to go back and have that conversation and say, honey, I don't necessarily think I want to be a chemist, and I don't know what that is, but I'm going to talk to my professor and figure that out. That's a tough sell.
Oh, for sure.
And we had to have some long conversations about that. It didn't happen overnight, but I talked to my professor, and he asked me, what are your interests, like personal interests? And that was the first time anyone in my career actually asked me what my personal interests were. And I liked outdoors. I liked nature. I liked a lot of those things. I was actively into hiking and biking. And one of my professors just asked me, he says, what do you know about geology? And I didn't know a lot. In fact, I knew very little. And they said, well, geology is like chemistry. Most of everything you learn in mineralogy, for instance, is just hard chemistry. They're minerals, they're rocks. They have a chemical composition to them. And so I learned what I could use my chemistry towards, so it wasn't a total waste of time. But I ended up double degreeing, got a geology degree to go along with my chemistry degree. Just moved that to my minor and made geology my major.
Awesome. And
then got the opportunity to do a lot of water chemistry and other geologic studies while at OU, and got a master's degree in geology. And I actually was going to go into the environmental world. And I did that for a few years. I worked for the Oklahoma Water Resources Board here in Oklahoma City. Worked on an EPA Superfund project as a consultant for a consultancy out of Norman, and then came the opportunity to either take a job in Tulsa or to put in my application in some companies here in the city, and one of them was Chesapeake, and got the opportunity to go into oil and gas with exploration and development, and that opened whole new avenues to me as well. And so really I didn't have a clear course, but I certainly am glad I took the leaps when the doors opened to me, because it's been an amazing journey.
Definitely that. I didn't know that Chesapeake was really your first, main job out of this. And what a perspective that you could bring to that. I know the team, just from my knowledge of, we overlapped so many years there.
Right.
Like, I know how much that team meant to the success of the company, and finding these different areas and these different basins and being able to, you guys really amassed a very talented group.
Correct. Yeah, and we were very fortunate, and that goes back to leadership, right? And I know that's something you all talk about here on Listen Up. I enjoy listening to those things and hearing people's perspective on it, because it's something we're all working toward being better at. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I took away from Chesapeake leadership was, they weren't very closed-minded, in the sense of they were open to new ideas. They were open to being innovative and exploring new situations, not just exploring in the sense of oil and gas. That obviously they had down, but exploring new innovative processes. Something I learned with the land group and some of the other groups that you all worked in is the constant innovation that was even coming out of a processing approach.
That's right.
Like, how do you do it better every day? And that, I think, is what helped elevate the company. And what was shocking to me, being older and just really still starting out a career, was coming in and seeing how many young people were really given the controls.
Isn't that the truth?
That was amazing to me. Almost shocking, a little bit scary at times.
For sure.
But what I appreciated about that was it was instilling a culture of creativeness, right? That creativity was essential to the innovation that occurred at Chesapeake.
It really was, and it speaks. I continually go back, and I know I sound like a broken record on a lot of times that I say it, of there were so many, and still are, there's so much young talent that's out there, and they bring such a unique perspective to all these different jobs. And I applaud Chesapeake for all the hiring of so many young people, of getting fresh ideas, being able to look at different ways that they could bring like that innovation to departments all around. I mean, all around that campus. And now, I mean, obviously the times have changed, and these people are midway through their career. But when you catch up with those people or you see them on LinkedIn, I always am so proud because they're in such pivotal roles in companies all over the nation.
Right.
And like we can't go to, whenever we're traveling, we can't go to Denver or Midland or Dallas or Houston and go in a, like a happy hour, or go in like even just a, not even an industry meetup, but just like a young business, group meetup, and not see 3 or 4 people that that you had some sort of connection with. And I think that's so cool. Like, I think that is absolutely so cool. And it shows the training that they provided, the willingness to listen to new ideas, all of that just has transported people and put them in really great roles all over.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me when I think about it, because, as you grow up and as you're building your career, you're looking to the successes of the past, like the Apples and the Microsofts and GMs and Ford and things like that, and you're going, okay, well, what really became part of their legacy? It was really that birth of so many new ideas and companies and opportunities that grew out of them. It wasn't just the company. Yes, those were strong companies, have great histories, great people that helped to establish them, but look what their people went on to do. And I think that's something that's important to think about in the culture of innovation, and with good leadership. That's what you're really growing. It's not just your company. It's really you're growing people and giving them the most of their potential. And that's what Chesapeake did for me. And I'm so appreciative of it, because without the training and the opportunities, I certainly would not be here today. I mean, I never saw myself as the CEO of an energy company. That was never in the cards for me. And you go all the way back to the young Brent who was floundering around. That kid just wanted to work on cars. His wife said, no, that is not pushing yourself hard enough. Thankfully, I had that support, realizing I had more potential than that. But then, of course, through the process, there were others who then saw that also. And I'm glad I had those mentors and had those who believed in me, because without them, we certainly wouldn't be here today where we're at. And I think that's something that anyone who truly reflects back on their successes can find that commonality in that story, because 100%. Everyone has had that opportunity and support.
100%. I'm so daily. I'm so thankful. Like, I came from Ponca City, Oklahoma, with 2 parent teachers, and I mean that was great in and of itself, because having an only child of both of these teachers just teaching me from day one, and kind of instilling that mindset in me. But to be able to go through, and I'm thankful for the way that I grew up, and then I'm equally thankful for the opportunities that were given to me, because I'm 100%, I would never have had the chance to develop my career the way that I feel that I have without the people that have been just meticulously put in place to guide me in this direction. And you think of anybody at Chesapeake or in your school, of saying that you went and you talked to like your professors and give me some sort of guidance. Was there anybody in there that really stands out as like somebody of this is a key figure of pushing me or pushing my limits?
Really, I mentioned her as my wife, Audra.
That's great.
She constantly pushed me to excel and to succeed. And in this last couple of years, taking the big step of going out and venturing out on our own.
That's huge.
That was probably the next biggest conversation since the time I decided I didn't want to be a chemist. Going and changing industries and moving from really the environmental world into the oil and gas world, which really isn't as negative as people think, because if you come with an environmental background and culture, you can instill it, and we did, and they embraced it, we were very successful at those things. But when you were also looking at those transitions, not just in companies, but into really trying to start on your own, right? It's a huge undertaking, one of which I'm glad I was a little bit naive to, because, looking back, I did not realize how many challenges we'd face, and certainly did not expect a black swan event such as COVID-19, and so here we are in our infancy, trying something new, dealing with just life challenges, which everybody has to deal with. And then all of a sudden you get something like that at a critical stage in really trying to build a company that can have some success. I mean, though you're off the ground, you're not flying.
That's right.
And there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And I use a lot of analogies. And I know this is a football state, so one analogy I often use is, you can have a 99-yard run from one end zone to the other. And how many have either slowed down or just got a little bit complacent with their ball handling, or letting go of it, or letting somebody catch you from behind?
Right on the 1-yard line.
And you have to drive forward, and you have to be able to cross that line to truly succeed. And when we set metrics for how we're going to gauge our success, and of course how our investors are going to gauge whether or not we're going to be successful and continue on with those, is really you have to hit those metrics. And for us, some of those milestones were falling right in that critical period with COVID, and that transition to suddenly not working in an office environment, now working from home. People aren't necessarily open to you approaching them face to face, which I wasn't a landman, but we obviously have learned to appreciate what our landmen do for us in Galvanic. And one of the challenges for them is all of a sudden you get a pandemic, you get restrictions put in place, including not being able to get into some of your courthouses, and all of a sudden that changes the entire dynamic. And it's all of a sudden you have to get extremely creative and find new workflows, or else you're going to be stopped dead in your tracks. And if you can't figure out how to get around those, well, your company may be in fact in a position of failing.
For sure.
And that reality was certainly one we had to face last year. And again, we feel just extremely thankful for having the opportunities to kind of work around some of those. But it's all because of, again, some talented people. And we have talented people at Galvanic, and it's a small team. We're running pretty lean. But one of the takeaways I took away from the days back at Chesapeake is if you're going to have success, surround yourself with people with the best potential to have that success with, and make it the right team, right culture. I mean, all those things that were instilled at Chesapeake certainly resonate at Galvanic today.
That's absolutely fantastic. And so the story that you've shared with me, that now we're going to kind of get into of what is Galvanic.
Right.
The few things that I take away and I look at of what is so just unique and so special about this story is you did decide to try something new. You did, just like what you're talking about, of surround yourself with good people and you can make this successful. And you've proven through this COVID age that you're doing that, and you guys are going in a very positive direction. But let's get into what is Galvanic. Why is this so unique? And I think this is the thing that really people are just going to remember from this
right.
video cast of Galvanic Energy is something that I think truly is going to kind of reshape a lot for energy.
Right. Well, thank you, number one, for giving us the opportunity to come and share our story here on Listen Up. And it's so to kind of paint the story of what Galvanic is it's really a merger of a couple of things. Obviously, through my career, I got the opportunity to do a lot of different things, and to learn a lot of different skills. And then some of the people who work with me and I've had relationships with and worked with in the past who come on board with us have some of those same stories. And so that helps us to have that marriage in the company. What it really comes down to is from the oil and gas side, obviously, the exploration. As a geologist, that's where you first really apply your geologic knowledge. You have to go out, you have to understand, you have to do the interpretation, which we enjoy doing as scientists. We love to problem solve in that sense. We like the idea of new discovery. It's what drives us. And so you start with that particular concept, but then you merge it with the idea of some sort of business model, right? We could have gone out and just started another oil and gas company. There was ideas that we knew were evolving, especially as energy has been transitioning, especially over this last decade. There's this big push toward green energy. And I've seen where some have been successful in getting into the solar space, getting into the wind space as well. And there are some applications of that, especially on the land side. Mm-hmm. But from the geologic side, right, that's all above surface. The geologist is looking, everything surface and below. And one of the things I took away from my previous background with the idea of chemistry, especially water chemistry, it's a background my vice president of operations has, Mark Becker, who was a senior geologist at the USGS for 25 years before we brought him on at Chesapeake. And then, of course, he's now come along with us to Galvanic as well, is having that understanding of chemistry was what helped us to be successful in a lot of things we did in the past. But one of the things we found unique and interesting about it is in the oil and gas industry, brine, or the salt water, is typically looked at as just simply a nuisance, right? It's a waste product. It's something that is co-produced with the oil and gas. It's something that we have to pay for to handle. We have to be able to transport. We have to be able to treat. We have to be able to store. We have to be able to dispose. That's what drives up project costs. And unfortunately, it's always there. It's typically not thought about in the grand scale, but of all the things we move and touch in the oil and gas industry, salt water is the number one thing. We produce far more salt water, almost 8 times more salt water than we do in oil on average across the United States. And so when you start thinking about it from that standpoint, the question really that we started to raise was what is the value of that salt water? And some of the things that obviously come out of that is that the most obvious is the water. And people think about the water and its treatment obviously has worked its way back into, used for frack waters. And those things are obviously important. But we wanted to get down to the molecular side of that. And we wanted to understand what is the chemistry of some of these salt waters. We understand that they're highly saline, so it means they have a lot of sodium chloride. We know that sometimes they're extremely enriched in iron and things of that nature. But I'm talking about what about with regard to some of the most critical things to the success of the green energy space and be able to continue to move that forward, especially for the United States to become a leader in this. Because in all reality, the U.S. has become independent in oil and gas, but it is extremely dependent on critical minerals and rare earth elements. And those are a hot topic today because those are the basic materials used in the electronics, the magnets, the motors, the batteries. All of those things, if we don't have them and we don't have our own supply chain for and haven't procured them ourselves, we are actually dependent on other countries, such as China, to be the suppliers of those materials. And that puts the United States in a really unique situation. And so
a real disadvantage,
right,
too. I mean, a complete disadvantage if we don't have anything here that we can produce that with.
Right.
Interesting.
And so even under Trump as president, and now, of course, it's still a hot topic even with the Biden administration, is that what are we going to do to procure these critical elements? Not just from these other countries, but what are we going to do to source it? I mean, North America is enriched in its own elements. The question is, have we truly tapped into all of the potential resources? Now, when I say tapped into, obviously there's the idea of what does the mining industry do? And of course, what does the mining industry come across as, especially to environmentalists? Of course, I come from that environmental background.
Right.
Is a lot of things we dealt with in EPA super funds and such as clean up from mines. They obviously have a lot of negative impacts. There's the open pit mining. There's the waste tailings, which we even understand as far as the Pitcher, Oklahoma area. We know what the impact of some of those things can be. There is even open pit solution mining where fluids are pumped in and allowed to literally dissolve materials in the native rock or the geology. But those become contaminants in and of themselves. And of course, there's been certain contaminant releases, such as a few years ago in Colorado that impacted entire tributary stream systems. And so when those types of things are out there, obviously the whole mining industry has a negative perspective. And yes, we love our electronics. We're now embracing electric cars. There's all of these huge opportunities for us to move forward in this energy transition, especially embracing the green and renewable energies. But the limiting factor is this NIMBY idea, or not in my backyard, right? As long as we're producing those out of other countries, we're okay with it.
Right.
But because it creates a security risk, for instance, with the talks with China and the United States over the last few years, the hypothetical, what if China decided to just cut us off?
Yeah.
And they're controlling 60 to 80% of some of these materials, right? Our dependency is going to be taken advantage of. And that's a really unfortunate situation to think about. I mean, we've learned a lot of lessons going back to the early 70s with the oil embargoes and things of that nature. And so there's a lot of these lessons to be learned in that. But coming kind of back to what you were talking about is in these chemistries of these waters, what we started to realize is there are rare earth elements that are already in solution form in these brines associated with oil and gas fields. And there are these critical minerals, or the elements of the critical minerals, that are also in an ionized form that are floating around in these salts. And so, it's not just sodium chloride, it's not just iron, but the question really becomes is who tests for these things? And in the oil and gas industry, we've never been focused on those things. If it's not corroding my pipe and it's not creating scaling issues, I'm really not worried about the rest of it, and the rest of it just typically gets flushed away. And so what Galvanic Energy is built on is the principle of let's look at those things. Let's determine if there's value, and is there a way to actually capture the value? And that became the premise of the model for our company.
That is fantastic. It's one of those things of we've known for years of when we're drilling, we're saying oil and natural gas, that's what we're getting out of here.
Right.
But there's so much other, like how you say of the water is the biggest producer. We're
Right.
bringing up the most water. There's money to be had there, and there's huge value of being able to take that dependence off foreign countries, China or any place else, to be able to have these and to be able to develop some sort of a game plan now
Right.
to prepare for the future. Is this a space that you're not seeing too much other competition in? Are you guys kind of leading the charge in this that you're seeing, or are there others that are kind of in the same vein?
Right, so there's not many. We don't lead the charge. In fact, if you're going to be a successful startup, it's probably best you not lead the charge. A lot of companies
mindset.
get out there. In fact, we had connected with a lot of them back in our Chesapeake days of trying to see if there was opportunities to apply those things at Chesapeake, and we did in some cases. But we also saw a lot of companies who, try to sell you goods or ideas or technologies that may not have been as clearly understood or as advertised. And we learned from those situations too. And so part of what we had to do while doing our exploration phase was evaluate, do we want to be technological in the sense of coming up with extraction methods? Do we want to get into the deep elements of the chemical engineering? And that wasn't our background. And we also understood that those companies which are being successful at that, and there are a handful of them, there was no need to try to compete with those who had already invented the wheel. In fact, there's a lot of patents and things out there. It would be better for us to find is a proper partner who's looking for an opportunity. So you have these companies who actually have technologies, and they're looking to make the applications of their technologies that they have refined in laboratories and they have refined and maybe even some pilot phases. But if they don't have the upstream supply chain, in the sense of you're not the initial provider, then obviously there's not a lot you can do with that. And that's created some challenges for some of these companies, and their successes are obviously dependent upon how strong that relationship is too in those situations. And so they may have great technology, they just may have bad partnerships, or not proper funding to move the projects forward. And so those are all challenges. One of the things we had recognized is we didn't want to be dependent in the sense of just working for oil and gas companies, for instance, and relying upon their supply as for feedstock, through their brines and salt waters. But what we realized is our strength is exploration, and we had that coming from oil and gas. We also understand water chemistries really well. And when you take water chemistry and you apply back to, it has its geologic roots, it dissolved from somewhere. That's how it got enriched and entrained in the fluids. So if you can take that, work it all the way back to the roots and understand what roots am I looking for, then you can take that exploration approach and add in the water chemistry, and you can actually go out and do the same thing as you would in oil and gas. And so that becomes kind of our proprietary model is we have some understanding of that we can go out looking for, analyzing for, and discovering some of these elements. But also then taking it to the next level, which is from a business model, it's not just finding, it's finding in economic quantities, right? And then going back to the oil and gas approach and borrowing from that world is you've got to go out and not only delineate the prospect and understand it and then quantify it and do your reserves and valuations, but then you have to figure out, okay, now what's the infrastructure going to potentially look like? How am I going to procure it? And in the mining world, they're comfortable doing a lot of deals with like large BLM tracts. But when it comes to what we do in oil and gas, you have to go out and work with private mineral ownership, and you have to go out and you have to lease these materials. You have to be able to work with landowners and have those relationships. And so it takes longer. It takes a lot more effort. And I think that's why also a lot of mining companies have kind of been cautious towards just jumping out here into the oil and gas world because they don't understand it as well. Now,
and that's where you guys come in, because you do understand.
Right. Yeah. And we worked for a huge land machine, at Chesapeake. Once we had a geologic idea, we worked, hands-on with the land teams and saw how they did it. And so that makes us, made us comfortable for it. Didn't mean we knew exactly how to do their job. And one of my best hires was an expert at that, because it certainly wasn't what we did well. Right. We were relying a lot on contractors, and we still have a lot of contractors that work for us. In fact, a couple of companies here in Oklahoma City, their companies and staff work for us. So we've just put the right people on the right tasks. But we've given them the boundaries and given them, the guidelines for which to operate in. And so it's been great in learning, because it's yet another education. Sure. And again, it goes back to my naivety of like, how much did I really know when I got into this? I thought, oh wow, this is really going to be easy. And I'm also used to a monstrous land machine, whereas now I'm just working with, tens, maybe 20s of people, not as large, but still having the same expectations.
For sure. Oh my gosh. Well, it's such an interesting concept, and it's something that I feel like we were talking on one of the previous episodes of this, of like even landmen now they're expanding that out to wind and solar. People that are working in those fields are now being considered by the AAPL of actual landman work. And so it just continues to go out, and I feel like what you guys are doing and how we're looking at those rare earth elements, that provides the opportunity for more jobs in the energy industry, more like the benefit of companies like, I don't know, like Tesla and other car companies that are getting into it. Like, these would be things that they're looking for as well. And so it really feels like this continues to expand out right at this wonderful time where we are seeing this expansion in kind of that green side. But it also gives back to the roots of the oil and gas drilling world, of kind of goes hand in hand with anyone that is exploring this, is pulling up that brine. There's a way to find value in it.
Yes. And when we look at the current administration, and I'm not taking sides with what their political agendas are and things, but the Biden administration certainly helps our cause because we have a green spin. Right. It may not necessarily be a pro for oil and gas, but it has a huge upside for us. But one of the challenges that their energy department is going to face is there's this talk about taking, for instance, the coal jobs, right? I mean, you have this diminishment of coal production. You're having the closure of these mines, especially back east and possibly, going to affect up north, is that they keep talking about how they're going to take these individuals and they're just going to retrain them. And that's really a starting over, because what is the direct correlation between coal mining and wind generation or solar production, right? I mean, now you need to go back and get a, electrical engineering background. Or you're going to have to go deal with things that are, that are just completely foreign to you, or new technologies of just even working with the computers and software packages and things like that, when these individuals are actually working with heavy machinery, and those kinds of settings and situations. And so that's not a directly correlative opportunity. Whereas with the oil and gas industry, and what our business model is based on is really, how do we upscale the oil and gas industry? How do we help it with this energy transition so that way it has a future? Now, some of the majors have made investments towards this energy transition. Like BP has invested in a lot of wind, right? They have bought a lot of turbines and wind farms. There's other companies doing similar things, especially with the incorporation of solar, especially on site, on your work sites, so that way it's your energy supply. But what about the things you actually already do really, really well, right? That your people are already trained to do. And that goes all the way back to is, well, if 80% of what you move is brine and salt water, why not continue to do that, but look for new opportunities of extracting value from it? And yes, it may take the hiring of new individuals coming out of, the chemical engineering world, and possibly, trying to do some new training to start thinking differently instead of just thinking about the hydrocarbons or the organic chemistries. Now start thinking about the inorganic chemistries, about the elemental, atoms and ions that are in the free, in the free solution that you're already moving. And that becomes obviously your transport mechanism. And of course, we know how to do that, right? We know how to put, wells deep in the ground. We're even innovative enough to take them horizontally and get to unique places and a unique placement. We know how to open up reservoir. We know how, all that mobility works. We know how to dispose. We've become better at that. And in our model, really, it's really about a cyclic pattern. It's not even taking one thing from one reservoir and putting it somewhere else, and then dealing with obviously the challenge of that, which could include seismicity. But it's more like the oil floods that are used in secondary and tertiary recoveries, where you actually move fluid cyclically through the reservoir. You'll have some wells that are extractors, some wells that are reinjectors. And what you're doing is you're just bringing through the fluids. And what you're trying to do is just extract the specific ions without creating a lot of residual waste. Your waste actually just gets reinjected back into the subsurface. And you let geology do its part and hydrogeology do its part. And again, you're just moving fluid and you're just extracting the specific ions that you're interested in. And if it's economic, then it makes a great deal of sense. But the important part is unlike conventional mining today, you have reduced the environmental footprint tremendously. Right?
I didn't even think about that. You're
because a pad site, in comparison to the largest open pit mine, and then of course the tailings and the pilings and things of that nature, or like give an example today, you can extract lithium for the lithium ion batteries either through large open pit mines, which they do actively in Australia, and some of the largest holes in the earth are around that area called Greenbushes, and they've been doing lithium mining there for years. And that's okay in maybe the most remote parts of Western Australia. But in South America, it's a different process for lithium mining in Chile and Argentina, where actually they find these large salt flats, similar to what they do in an area called Silver Peak, Nevada. That's the only active lithium mining facility in all of North America today. Making less than 1% of the world's lithium. That's all we have here in North America right now in production. And during COVID, it was zero, right? They even shut it down. But in South America, they pump out of these salars or salt lakes, and they just pump the fluid to surface, and they just put big berms around these huge water containment facilities, and they're not just acres or hectares. It's you can measure them by square miles, and they just allow for solar evaporation. And of course, solar evaporation is a waste of water, right? It's taking it out of the ground hydrologic system, right? You're now taking it out, you're evaporating it to into the atmosphere, and it's transported wherever, right? You don't get it back in the ground here.
Right.
And so they just extract out, they evaporate, they take the lithium salt crystals and everything else, they separate it, and that's how the lithium is created out of South America for lithium-ion batteries. And so there's these big, two different processes, but both of them have huge environmental consequences, and certainly some concerns to be considered, especially with ESG being such a hot topic today. Right. How can you promote a green, renewable energy if you're depending upon some questionable, kind of archaic mining techniques? What we need to bring forward is new, cleaner solutions. And there are still things to be worked on, as far as reducing the carbon footprint of even what I'm proposing. But the companies are out there working on that, and they're trying to come up with these closed loop systems where they just simply circulate through the things that they need, utilizing the geothermal if they can utilize that. Obviously, there's solar that's available to them. But all of those processes, and the companies are out there trying to do this direct extraction process, whether it be for battery materials or other critical minerals or rare earths. The opportunity is wide open. It just starts with the initiative of what's in your water. And if you don't know what's in your water, you don't know what you're flushing away.
Absolutely amazing. It's things like this, of being able to get to sit down with people like you and being able to find out. I like when you always say learn something new every day. Like, I always love talking to engineers, geologists, anything, and getting this different perspective on these different things, because holy cow, it's mind-blowing of when you think about how these things are extracted and how we can continue to refine that process going forward. And this is where it is now. Where's it going to be in 5 years? Where's it going to be in 10 years? Right. And how we're going to continue to evolve this.
Right. And from just a business strategy standpoint, you would look for new opportunities for growth, right? You're looking for sector growth to be able to move into it, right? You can't just come up with this idea 20 years ago before the advent of even mobile phones and iPads, right, and smartphones, right, and laptops. That was the beginning of kind of the microcosm of where lithium batteries, for instance, could go. Of course, when I say a lithium battery, there's other elements in there, right? There's cobalt, there's nickel, there's graphite, there's all these other things, and of course they've got to all be sourced to even start that. Then there's the electronic elements that go into as components, and those are where the rare earths kind of plug in. And so you have all these things evolving. Well, now all of a sudden you're going to upscale it to automobiles. And you have General Motors, who started this year by stating that they were going to be all electric in the future. And they're already pushing towards, developing electric vehicles globally. Right. Volkswagen just went all in. Obviously they had challenges in the past with diesel and their air quality emissions. They decided to take their company in a new direction, and instead of trying to go from diesel to gasoline, they're just going to bypass the gasoline phase and go straight to electric. And Volkswagen is one of the global leaders in auto, in the auto industry and production. So that's going to have a huge impact. So now all of a sudden you take just the demand and some of the forecasts. Benchmark Mineral Intelligence, for instance, watches that market of all the elements that go just into the battery, for instance, and they track what's the future look like for that. What's the supply versus demand, what's the supply chain looking like, especially in various regions, because right now it's been just coming out of some very singular locales as far as its sourcing. But now it's like, okay, well, you've got Tesla building a huge facility in Austin and says they're going to build their own batteries from scratch. You've got GM building their huge plant for their lithium battery supply for their EVs in Ohio. You have others building in Tennessee and Alabama, such as SK Innovation and LG. I forgot what the rest of it is. I can't remember. LG, yeah, LG, right? But so they're building these huge, massive battery manufacturing facilities to just support here in North America, but yet we've only got that little mine in Nevada, and there are proposals for opening up some new mines, but again, they'll be conventional.
Right.
But there are some companies who are starting to think out of the box, and they're starting to look at is oil and gas reservoirs really going to be an opportunity to create a supportive environment? And there are a few companies who are exploring that and trying to apply from their mining, expertise, their chemical extraction processes, which would have been used even in hard rock, because at some point in time, you got to take the hard rock, crush it down, dissolve it, and sometimes that's using some pretty caustic acids. But in any case, you've got to dissolve it down, then you got to extract it chemically from all the other impurities. Because what it comes back to in batteries is all about purity. That's what creates the high energy density. That's what's creating the longer distances and as far as mileage.
Of course. And
then so we go electronic devices, we go to electric vehicles, and what's the next big move? Well, now we're talking about, after Texas and the energy situation from this really cold Arctic blast we had this winter.
Improving grids.
Now what do we do to improve the grids? And that's energy storage, right? I mean, we've got intermittent energy being created from solar and wind. Well, how do we ensure we actually have that energy when maybe those windmills aren't turning or when the sun isn't shining? And that's going to go to energy storage. And so now you've got to capture the excess. And we do create some excess at times, when the sun's really bright. And when the wind blows really strong, like it just did the last few days here in Oklahoma, there's a lot of excess energy being created.
Right.
But most of it's going to be wasted as heat energy, because it's just going to dissipate. It's just sitting around the transmission lines. There's no way to store it. If the industry and commercial sector or the residents aren't sucking up that energy and supply, it's going to ultimately go to loss. And so there's a lot of opportunity for improvement in those areas.
I hope you learned something today. I've definitely learned something today. The out-of-the-box thinking, the being able to figure out how do we look toward the future, right, and be able to put those plans in action. This has really been, it really has been an educational time for me, and I know it is for everyone that's going to watch this. To end on, we always try to end on some sort of a positive note. The last couple of years been rough for the people in the energy industry.
Right.
What do you see as we're coming out of this? What are the biggest positives or the biggest things that you're looking forward to of seeing us get back out and being able to get things kind of moving back to normal again?
Well, I think right now the vaccine is a big help, right? I mean, it has nothing to do with energy, but it has to deal with, again, going back to the innovative process, right? Getting it deployed,
right,
manufacturing enough of it, but getting it in the arms of, our fellow Americans so that we can get back to, a sense of normal. My team and I have almost all been through the process. We've almost all been vaccinated 100% with both of our doses. We have a couple that are just, unfortunately, we're in phase 4, and so that just opened up, so they'll be able to get theirs here soon.
Great.
And so, we're going to be able to make that transition from, a year of working from home and, an occasional socially distanced meeting at a large facility, even though there's so few of us, getting back to the work environment. Because really what I find is the best energy, not to use a pun here, but I'm going to do it. But the best energy doesn't come from what we're creating as companies. It's the energy that comes from within. It's from your people, and the collaboration, the creativity. It is all spurred on by having really access to your coworkers. And that's been, I feel like, a little bit stifled. And as we get back into that engagement, I think we're going to see productivity get back to increasing. It's not to say that we couldn't work harder and work longer hours from home,
Right.
but we're always trying to also balance that with working smarter. And sometimes, it's nice to be in that kind of quiet space to get creative in your mind. But it's also great to sit down with your peers and challenge each other's ideas to come up with the best solutions. I can come up with a solution and I can certainly implement it as a leader. Doesn't mean it's the best one, and I need that kind of pushback and debate to really determine whether or not it's the best decision for the business. And we kind of miss that right now. We do it over Zoom, but it's also hard. It's just like talking to someone on the phone or sending a text or an email. You don't always get all the other subtleties, such as body language, facial reactions,
Right.
or just hearing somebody sigh, right? Those subtleties aren't captured in the Zoom world. And so we need to see them, we need to understand how people really feel about, these things that we're proposing and working on. And it's also a much better way to gauge the happiness of your employees, their satisfaction with how you do your job and how it relates to theirs. So I'm looking forward actually to a lot of that in the upcoming year. But I'm also looking forward to being successful at getting the business really moving quickly and efficiently also.
Well, man, I appreciate you coming in on this.
Thank you.
I
Appreciate
genuinely do. If anyone wants to get a hold of you, or what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Best way is go to our website, galvanicenergy.com. There you can scroll down. There's a contact point there where you can submit your email, depending on what it is that you're looking for, what you're looking to learn. Someone will get back to you. Some cases I do the response myself. Certainly I'm the point person for the company. But if you have a very specific question that can be answered by one of our technical experts, we'll certainly pass it along to them also.
Fantastic. And he's a good one to follow on LinkedIn as well. He posts a lot
Right.
of really interesting articles. So for Brent Wilson, Drew Hopkins, thank you for watching Listen Up today, and we'll be back and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.